Afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Tuesday, August 13th Government Relations and Communications Committee meeting, and welcome to practically a new school year, right? Hope everybody's had a great summer. And here we go, off to the 2019-20 school year, and school board meetings ready to go. So with that, I'd just like to, it looks like Dr. Babson, you and I are the only ones present today, so welcome, hello.
Welcome.
Good
yeah.
summer?
Hi. Yep, good, yep,
Good, glad to hear it.
fun, productive, yep.
And said hello to Patty and our administrative liaison, Mr. Petiti, and of course our superintendent, Mr. Batchelor. So without further ado, Mr. Petiti, do you have any administrative remarks for us this evening?
Not tonight.
Okay. Well, at that point then, we'll move right into public comment. Do we have any comment from members of the public? No, I see some head shaking. But it's nice to have some members of the public here. Thank you for joining us today. We'll move from that public comment then into the approval of minutes. Did you get a chance to look at the minutes, Dr. Babson?
I did.
Yes, and you ready to?
Seal of approval.
Seal of
Yes.
approval. Okay, that makes two of us. So the minutes are approved, and we'll move right into our agenda for today. Agenda item number 1, Mr. Petiti, a debriefing on the 2019-20 Pennsylvania budget and changes to the Pennsylvania School Code.
Thank you. So you'll see in your attachments this evening that we have a PowerPoint presented by the Pennsylvania School Boards Association on July 9th, which goes over the 1920 budget in great detail, as well as changes to school code. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through each slide here. That's why we put it into the attachments so folks could look through it at their leisure. I'm going to point out a couple slides that we especially want to take notice of, and then we can have a discussion. So the first slide I'm going to pull up is I want to go through this number slide. What you see here is a comparison between last year's budget and this year's budget and the difference. What's notable here, if you take some time to look through this, is that Social Security line. And what's important to note about that line is while the budget says this is in thousands, by the way, so that's 674 million, right, instead of 6,774,000. Is that line item used to be a separate line item outside of the education budget, Social Security. So they rolled it in. So it's important to note that because while it seems like there could be a certain increase in the amount of money allocated to public education this year, that chunk of money for Social Security was never in there to begin with. So that's kind of almost a false addition once it was brought into the budget and consolidated with that. And you're going to be able to see that in a couple slides from now. So I wanted to note that while the budget increase, they could tout a certain number, that number should be, reduced by that Social Security line simply because it was not in that line item 1819. Does that make sense? Okay. If we skip ahead to, let's see what slide we're on. We're on this one here, basic education funding. You'll see that of the 160 million they're saying that's going in the new formula, 130 million of that is earmarked for pension obligations. So really, we can reduce that 160 to 30 million actually going into the classrooms for the 500 or so school districts in the state, or the 500 school districts in the state. And that amount of money, since it goes through the formula, not all districts are getting the same amount of money out of that 160. So again, something to be aware of when you take the look at that 160 in new money that they're proposing, that 130 of it is for pension, so really 30 is for actual classroom usage. PA Schools Work wanted 400 million. So a little bit shy of that number here. The next slide is one I was telling you about that gives you kind of an idea of what that Social Security number does. So there's that soundbite that the additional money is there, but if you take that red box out, you'll see that there really wasn't as significant of an increase that is said that there was. If we move on to the special education slide.
If we have any comments about basic
Comments
education,
first,
would
yeah.
that be okay, or would you
Yep.
rather
No, go
towards
for
the
it.
end?
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's very accurate, Mr. Petiti, that there was certainly a lot of hay made about the increase in basic education funding that came with this year's budget. Appreciate your breaking it down because the numbers can be a little misleading. While there was an increase overall, a big chunk of that increase actually was a realignment of one particular line item that made that increase seem a little bit larger than it otherwise typically would be. And the other thing to note that was helpful in this year's budget was the fact that for the first time there was enough money so that the pension obligations didn't leave us in the red. There was a little bit left over that could technically go into the classroom, but like you said, it certainly wasn't the level of increase that the Pennsylvania Schools Work campaign was looking for in order to make sure that way more than just satisfying pension obligations was available to school districts to be able to fund educational needs throughout the Commonwealth.
Yep.
So it's a good trend, but we still have more work to do in our advocacy to get those line items higher for basic education.
Yes. So if we move to this special education graph, I want to go right to the one with appropriations versus expenses, because this kind of relates to the second agenda item that we have tonight to mention. And you can see in the orange bars here, they illustrate how critical it is to modernize and fully fund the Federal Individuals with Disabilities Act, or IDEA, because those orange bars, when the IDEA was put in place, Congress initially promised in 1975 to provide 40% of the funding needed for special education, and the most current investment is less than 14%. So that, we have an agenda item next that's just kind of an informational only item, but it lets you know that there's a forum being put on by PSBA and by Centennial School District, and I might be jumping ahead here, but it does connect to the slide on August 21st, that's going to go over this issue and call for asking districts to come together, interested parents to call for a modernization and a fully funding of IDEA. And this chart helps to show just how stark those differences are in funding. Any thoughts about this? Comments?
No, I mean, I think that every school district I think that these bar charts are really helpful to see how expenses for special education are so disproportionate to the funding that's contributed by the state and the federal government. It's really important to fund the needs that special education students have, but a vast portion of it is on the backs of local taxpayers as opposed to the promised funding from the state and federal government. So thank you for pointing that out. I do agree with you that this is an important slide.
Well said, and if I could just add one more thing. When people talk about an unfunded mandate, this is pretty much what they're talking about. So you see the increase in needs, but you see a pretty much a static level of funding. So I think it illustrates it pretty well.
Any other questions about the budget? Because I wanted to move into the school code. Everybody's good with the budget? And again, I know there's much more here to look at, and we could talk about it for the entire meeting, of course, but that is why we have made it available to the public on the website. So please check that out if you have the chance.
No, I would just say about the budget that we bring this up at the end of, in the summer every year, because it's important for people to understand how our schools are funded. A vast portion of it comes from local taxpayers. There's also state and federal contributions, and following what happens at the state level is really important, and it's incumbent upon all of us who are public school advocates. We always invite the public to join us in our advocacy to try to make sure that we are getting the appropriate funding at the state and federal level. So the campaign goes on.
Yes. And again, that's why we are informing the public about the meeting on the 21st. And that's going to be held, there's information on the table there, but that's going to be held at, let me get my thing here, at the William Tennant High School on August 21st from 7 to 9 p.m. And we can talk about that more if you like in a moment at our next agenda item. For now, though, we can talk about the school code changes. So it's important to clarify there's an omnibus school code which is a bill that can be passed kind of to make the budget go through in many cases, because some of the independent items aren't done individually. They're just kind of folded into the budget passage. And you'll see that a lot of these that we're going to go over actually would fall into that omnibus category. And then there are a couple, most notably maybe the Security Act, that are outside, that were independent of that. So I just want to make sure that we all understand that's kind of how sometimes this works. At the end of the year, they just kind of get folded in to make sure the budget can pass, because some people want this, some people want that, and to get everything in, they just say, okay, we'll just do this all together, and then you look at it and you say, wow, look at all the stuff that was put in there. So let's go through just the highlights quickly. Flexible instruction days. It's gotten a little bit of attention in the news. They're not given automatically, so districts have to apply, and I know that our curriculum committee is going to be looking into this and discussing flexible instruction days and just the whole concept. So we won't get too deep into it here, but know that it's something that our other committee is interested in examining. If we skip to the next slide, we'll see, I should say this, let's see which one I'm on here. It's also important to say the last major overhaul to the school code was 1949. So it's been a while. There's been some updates since then, but just so you know, that's how old school code is. So if we look at the Special Education Funding Commission, you'll see that there has been a commission reconstituted to review the funding formula for special education payments. So we'll be keeping an eye on that and seeing how we will possibly be involved. And and the second point here, Secretary of Education Pedro Rivera had a stance on, and I don't recall exactly what that was, but I remember we were talking about it. And Ms. Goldman, if you could remind me exactly what because I think he sent some letters in to the government to address this.
Yeah, well, what passed as part of the school code bill with the budget was that if you have a certain student that has 20% truancy over the course of the school year, that student's standardized test scores won't count towards accountability on behalf of the school district. Secretary Rivera's position on that, though, is that the Pennsylvania law flies in face of what the federal requirement is under ESSA, where the truancy has to be at least 50% during that same period of time. So who knows how that will play out, but right now Secretary Rivera has an issue with this law that the Pennsylvania legislature passed. So sometimes those things happen.
But it is important to point out, because if 50% is what the federal government says, then it clearly is not the same number. So he has a right to take issue there, I'd imagine. So if we go to the next page here, I just quickly note that the compulsory school age has been moved from 8 to 17 to 6 to 18. Just a change there that just is worth pointing out. EITC, let's talk about that for a moment. EITC, basically this continues to take away from our state funding in the general fund, which decreases the availability of funding for public education. So the money that a person could take and put towards this EITC is pre-tax, right? So then in that case, it goes to a separate kind of bucket, I guess, that doesn't get rolled in, so then you basically take that money out, and you don't have that option to use that. Could you help me clarify that?
Yeah, the Pennsylvania Constitution stipulates that all monies in the general fund for the state need to be provide only for public education. So in order to fund private school scholarships, it needs to go outside of the general fund of the Commonwealth. So that's where a separate organization has been set up for people who want to contribute to private school scholarships. They're incentivized right now by the state to make that contribution and get in return for it a tax credit. So what this EITC change was that it increased the amount of money that is available to be earmarked as a tax credit in a year to $185 million. And the issue around that for those of us who are public school advocates is the fact that that's $185 million that would have been in the general operating fund and conceivably could have been part of a basic education funding line item at some point, but instead it's earmarked for private school scholarships, which, you know, there's certainly merit in instances to be able to provide scholarships to to students to attend non-public schools. But again, there's only so much money to go around, and that's part of the challenge of having a program like this when it comes to funding public schools. In addition, what this bill did was that it increased the scholarship eligibility for a family from a household income of $85,000 to $90,000. And originally, this scholarship program and concept was established to help what are considered the lowest of the low-income families. And so as the household income eligibility number rises, the perception is that it's really not altogether the lowest income of families who are availing themselves of these scholarships. So that's another thing that's a little bit tricky about this too. I don't know if it made it in there or not, but I was at the House Education hearing where they were also including in this package an automatic escalator, meaning that without legislative approval, the amount of money that could be earmarked for these scholarships would automatically increase every year by 10%. So I think it was included in the final version of the bill, but that was another thing yet again, which those of us who are fighting for every dollar for our public schools get a little frustrated with, because to have we don't get too many automatic escalators for anything when it comes to funding, and it was a little aggravating to see this pass out of the House Education Committee when it came up for a vote in the spring, and it may very well have passed both chambers and been part of this final version of the bill.
Okay. So what's next? I'm going to skip ahead here to the slide I had referenced. I believe is where we're going next. Is the slide I had referenced earlier is Senate Bill 621, which concerns kind of safety and security. And there is a bunch of stuff in here regarding the 3 different types of school officers that they delineate. One is school police officers, one is school resource officers, and the other is school security guards. I did have Mr. Brooks, Director of Operations, provide me with the differences of what those are. And of course, I'm trying to get onto my email so that I can get those definitions, and I can't connect on my iPad here. But there are certain differences that PSBA has outlined that would separate each of those categories. And it's important because if you look through Senate Bill 621, you'll see that they allow for certain things that SROs can I guess be allowed to do versus what school police officers versus school security guards. So it's important that we understand what those people are, what their characteristics are supposed to be, and what training they're supposed to have. And in that same email that I can't get access to, there was some information about various trainings that are being made available. So for those that, I guess, for the SROs or for other security guards in the district that we don't have any SROs currently, but other security guards could potentially take. If you recall, back in April of 2018, we did pass a resolution as a board that with concerning school safety, specifically the use of the ability to carry firearms. And that resolution passed, like I said, in April, and it did state explicitly that we do not support any of our teachers or staff carrying any sort of firearms in school. It would be only, police officers, law enforcement officials, if anybody, that we would allow for such a thing. And in that same resolution, we talked about that we would, that we would not be sending students to participate in activities at schools that, with our knowledge, armed their teachers. So we did also have that in the resolution as well. So we've kind of gotten ahead of this kind of discussion. I know that this doesn't specifically touch on firearms in schools, but it has been something that has come up a lot, as you probably have seen in the media. So, a year ago or so, we addressed that from, our standpoint here in Radnor.
Mr. Patini, we talked about this at some point. There's, in this year's budget, there actually was the same allocation of $60 million to go towards school safety, and with that push towards school safety and that emphasis on it, there are some clarifications that have been needed along the way. So I think this bill was really not so much a matter of doing anything so novel and different, but lending some additional clarification to school districts about the different roles that various professionals could play in the name of school safety should a school district choose to go one of these routes, because there are so many facets and layers to how a school district has the flexibility to enact school safety. So this was really a clarification piece. At one point, it made it a little bit more confusing, but hopefully the dust has settled about that. But I think we'll continue to see in future legislation and guidance that's coming out of the department, things that are meant to clarify this really big topic of school safety that we're all really focused on right now.
Anything else on the school safety or the subject generally? Okay.
I don't know if you're getting to it, but the trauma-informed education, I just mentioned to my board colleague here that we're now all by law required to engage in trauma-informed education, and that'll be part of the school director training that goes into effect this year. So they've tacked on an extra hour to make sure that school board members, whether you're newly elected or re-elected, participate in trauma-informed education. And basically everybody who's operating in a school setting will need to have trauma-informed education as in the name of school safety.
You can see that right up here on the slide, Senate Bill 144, in case you needed to get some more information on that. And I was going to mention that. So that was my last, actually, bullet point that I had pulled out of these different acts and things that have passed, bills that have passed. If anyone wants to touch on other ones that are in here, we can do that, but that basically concludes my summary of this presentation.
Well, thank you again very much for that. It's really important that we know what the status is of funding from the state's perspective of our educational system and program that we offer here. So thank you. It's a lot of material to cover, and you did it very succinctly and effectively. So thank you very much for that.
You're welcome.
And if there are no other questions from Dr. Batson, we'll move into agenda item number 2. And that is to talk about this upcoming event next week.
Yeah, so as I mentioned in agenda item number 1, Representative Brian Fitzpatrick is hosting, along with U.S. Representative Brian Fitzpatrick, is hosting along with Centennial School District and the Pennsylvania School Boards Association a quote-unquote federal focus, fully funding IDEA on August 21st from 7 to 9 p.m. at William Tennant High School, and that's in Bucks County. And the gist of it is to talk about the critical need to modernize and fully fund the federal Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And as I had mentioned, the previous agenda item, although Congress initially promised in 1975 to provide 40% of the funding needed, the current federal investment in special education and related services for children with disabilities is less than 14%. So it's a bipartisan effort, and that they're undertaking in the U.S. Congress. And it's no cost to attend, but you can register through PSBA.org. And so make sure if you're interested, school board members, members of the public, students, come on out to William Tennant on the 21st.
Both our special ed director and assistant director are planning on attending.
Thank you.
No, it's great. And really, any member of the public who's interested.
New thing, new mic.
Any member of the public who's interested, it doesn't just have to be school officials. We really encourage you to go. There's no cost. It's not that far away. And in fact, PSBA is sort of re-energizing its focus on federal legislation, not just at the state level. And they are planning, I think at this point, like they have the PSBA Advocacy Day every year in Harrisburg. On September 9th, they're going to have one in Washington, D.C., and the focus is probably likely going to be IDEA. And I know my co-chair at the Legislative Council and I, Larry Feinberg, have talked about having a continuation of this conversation at our opening Legislative Council meeting on September 11th, and have bandied about some ideas, perhaps some board resolutions may be forthcoming. So we just wanted to make sure it was on the agenda so that it wouldn't be a surprise if we came back and said we want to talk more about getting ourselves together to advocate for additional funding.
Any more comments or questions about those two agenda items? I'm going to switch to communications now. We're going to put on the communications hat if we can, everybody's go with the GR portion. All good? All right. So communications. I wanted to take an opportunity tonight to go over just the past year's worth of some communications efforts and touching on some of the major projects and supports that were offered from the communications office in the district this year. Start just right off the bat with some of those. Sleep and school start time was a major initiative that communications tried to support. Website accessibility and making additions. We launched a YouTube channel and pursued some video projects that I'll get into in more detail. And then we'll go into registration and forms that we're working to launch for this school year, and then the technology that's coming out at the different schools through the study that was done over the past couple years. So this sleep and school start time, next couple pages are pulled from a presentation that was given to the Sleep and School Start Time Committee last year, just to bring them up to speed with the different communications that were offered or issued to educate the community about the topic. So you'll see we've had, again, I won't go through this in explicit detail, but you'll see that there's various ways that our office shared out information about this topic through whether that be print, graphics, website, etc., newsletters. And not only are we able to kind of get an idea of when these were sent and how many were sent, but we can also look at some analytics on how we did with getting the word out. And so we made sure to do that to check to see who was going where to get information, and then doubling our efforts in those areas. Same thing applies to the Radnor Reader. You'll see this data here from the Radnor Reader. This again was presented, I guess, back in January of 2019. The Radnor Reader is our newsletter, and it's sent through a program called MailChimp, and it allows us to be able to pull data on who clicks what and how many clicks we receive on certain topics throughout the entire newsletter. So we can see who's engaging with what gets the most clicks, and if we see somebody's, some people are interested in one topic, we'll make sure to communicate about that more often. So we were happy to see that a lot of attention was given in our newsletters and throughout to messages concerning sleep and school start time, which let us know that we were making an impact here. You'll see we get about 43% open rate, meaning that of the 2,900 subscribers or so, 43% of them actually open their email. Open the email when it comes in on Sundays, which is actually a high number. Industry average is about 17%. And click rate, that means that when you open an email, do you actually click something inside the email? Industry average is about 2%, and we're at 14%. So good stuff here for our newsletter. We've also been working on website accessibility, quality assurance, which is QA, and adding additions to the website. You'll notice that we have a whole slew of more pages that were added over the course of last year. Just a couple samples would be this Here Comes the Bus page, which will be sharing out more with parents so they can learn how to track their bus arrival, especially in light of the new schedules. We created this comprehensive back-to-school page where parents can go to learn, everything we could think of regarding back-to-school information and links and whatnot. There is now a page that's just dedicated to our TV station and our YouTube channel that gives you the exact schedule for the channel, as well as a calendar. If you want to see what's on when, you can go here and see what time things are on. You can also quickly access the most recent videos on YouTube here. And there are a number of other websites that were created throughout the year and will continue to make as major initiatives and other subjects deem a dedicated web page or section on the site. Important to note too is that our teacher web pages are going to be phased out. We will no longer have teacher web pages on our website. Secondary teacher web pages have already been removed so that teachers can focus solely on communicating through Schoology with parents and students, classroom information, public information on our teachers such as their email address, phone numbers, things like that can still be accessed via the directory, but now teachers can just post their information on Schoology that's specific to students and parents, and we don't need to make that public on the website. And that's going to save us a lot of accessibility issues and just content management resources.
And a lot of that was, again, out of the communication surveys and studies that you've done, that parents, felt that there was just an overwhelming number of different places they had to go to find information. So we're out of response from what we're hearing from parents. If they know there's one place to go, it kind of streamlines it. So that was really the major emphasis behind it.
Yep. So there's some info on the website. YouTube was a big...
To your point, I'm sorry, Michael,
No, go
to
ahead.
your point though, Ken, I think that, would you say it's fair to say, Mr. Petiti, that a lot of what you're doing continues to be informed by those communication surveys? So I know people oftentimes fill out surveys and think, well, whatever happened, I spent all this time answering a survey. It's safe to say that that still continues to inform the work of the communications department. Is that true?
Absolutely. I'd probably say most of the stuff you're seeing here came from the feedback received in various surveys. Even the YouTube, I know we talked about this for a long time, moving to YouTube and the kind of the complications we had with our previous provider. Well, we were happy to launch YouTube in August 2018. You can ignore that branded account issue bullet point at the end there. We were so happy to hear that Google reinstated our account. We had a little bit of a hiccup with uploading to YouTube over the past couple months because Google had made a change, which we were talking about when we thought about going to YouTube. We said, the one thing that we could run into is if Google decides to change their platform or charge or just, cut off access, we're kind of stuck. Whereas when we have MediaCast, if we're paying them and we have the unit, we kind of have some more pull there. Well, that kind of happened a little over the summer, and we got it sorted out. So our website, our YouTube account, has always been public, so it never went down publicly. But just behind the scenes, we couldn't post new content. So we got that sorted out, so we can ignore that branded account issue. Some kind of interesting data on our viewership. We had some successful videos this year. I don't know if you may have remembered the How You Made a Difference video was kind of a thing around kindness, and we had our students write letters to staff members that they made a difference in their lives. And that video had about 4,600 views, which pretty good. All in all, over the course of the year, our channel had 23,000 views, about 24,000 views, for a total of 97,960 minutes of viewing. So it's nice to be able to pull some of that information and be able to see that some of the videos we made are having an impact and people are watching them. And we'll continue that. We have some things planned coming up. We have a sleep public service announcement that we're making to educate the students on some sleep tips that they can use as we start off the school year. We have a video coming out to welcome people back, and a couple other things planned for the beginning of the year, video-wise. And I want to thank Nikki Cronin, the TV studio, for really, stepping up and making all of these things happen. Here's another thing that came out kind of through parent feedback, and that is to make every effort to move forms online for back to school. So we're in the midst right now of, you can see this web page here is for online registration for folks who are new to the district, which was launched in February 2019. So families, instead of filling out a piece of paper, they go online and they complete their online registration. We want to move that to all families at the beginning of the school year. So typically families will receive a big packet of paper and they would complete the paperwork and send it back. We are going to use our online portal for registration, also as a way to have them complete back to school forms. So we're working on that now. Here's the web pages on the technology integration study and devices. There's been a lot of communication coming out recently to our high school parents on this subject. You can, by all means, check through this website, but there has been a lot of communication support in sharing out the details of what the device is going to be, a Microsoft Surface Go for those that participate, and then also what if I want a BYOD, what if I want, with this question, how do I pay? All that information is on the technology integration study and devices page. Going forward, there is a lot of plans to continue the communication about our new schedules, especially as we go into the school year with reminders and mailers. We definitely want to also keep track of how we're doing in that regard, evaluation, and then share out communications throughout the year. So we remind people that we're on top of it, and as well as give them the sleep tips I had mentioned. Student wellness is a big thing that we're going to be supporting. I know that's coming through the curriculum, I believe, and I believe Mr. Kearney is leading that, so we're helping with getting information about that. School Messenger, that's our alert system. There's a lot of updates being made there. I won't get into it, but just know that we're trying to consolidate and coordinate amongst all the buildings how we use School Messenger. Alumni relations, we're looking to take a deeper, dive into how we can connect with alumni. There's a lot of demand for video throughout the district, and we're trying to meet that demand, especially outside the district as well. There's some local channels that would like us to partner with them in programming, and we're trying to figure out a way to accomplish that. Some branding advancements in terms of print materials, collateral such as brochures, pamphlets we're working on. We have some signage coming in, some flags coming in. So we're doing a couple different things with branding this, at the beginning of the year. Social media is really strong for us still. We have about 3,200 followers on Instagram and about 2,900 on Twitter. So we have a lot of people who seem to like what we're putting out there and a lot of engagement with our social media. And I get the stakeholder outreach, that's basically connecting with students, trying to find ways to get students more involved. We had 2 interns this summer. They were really great. One of them actually starred in the Sleep PSA. So you'll be seeing her, in a couple weeks.
Were we seeing her sleeping?
Acting sleeping, yeah. So you'll be seeing her in a couple weeks on that video. And then lastly, this is a bigger one. We're looking at the website. It'll be 5 years in February since our last refresh. And while we can do a good amount with what we currently have, usually industry standards about 3 to 4 years of a somewhat of a refresh. So I want to take a look at what that might look like if we wanted to go in a direction of a refresh or even a redesign, if we want to be so bold. That's all.
Dr. Babson, do you have any comments?
No, great. Thank you. Appreciate it.
I think I could be biased full disclosure, but I think that the work of the communications department is phenomenal. And if I want to put my bias aside, I hear around town from a lot of other school districts who say, what a great job we do in terms of communication. You probably get a call or two from a district here and there saying, how did you get the word out about that? And I think hopefully nothing's ever perfect, but it seems that communication has definitely continued to evolve and be strengthened. And when your department gets behind a particular initiative, whether or not the community might agree with this, that, or the other thing, we don't often hear, I never heard about it anymore. We do hear that, in fact, with a recent sleep and school start time study, I think there was one participant in a focus group who said, I'm not sure I'm still on board, but please don't tell me anything more about it, because I have heard plenty. So that's a testament to all the work that your department's been doing, and thank you, I guess, on behalf of all of us for the hard work and that your team's been doing, because I guess there's some sort of expression out there, and I'm not going to, at this time of day, try to remember exactly what it is, but it goes something to the effect of, you can be doing great work, but if no one knows about it, that sort of compromises the effort to some extent. So thank you for taking the great work that the district is doing and letting people know about it, and finding ways continually to create greater and greater engagement so that people do feel that their voices are being heard, and that every stakeholder has a say to some extent in what goes on in the district.
Just to add quickly, I've also heard the same, and I think it's good for the community just to know this, that other stakeholders in the area look to our district and what we're doing with our communications as kind of a model or an example to follow. So I just want just to share that. Thanks.
So thank you for that review. And with that, we will move into our last item, second to last item, which is new business. And I don't know if anybody has any. I did want to mention one thing that's sort of breaking today, and that is that Governor Wolf announced a charter school reform package that would include all kinds of stipulations for developing regulations on accountability, funding, et cetera. So obviously, charter school reform is something that there's been talk about for quite some time. Don't know how the legislature is necessarily going to react to that, but it was a point of demarcation that he has set up actually some very specific stipulations in this package for what he is proposing in terms of regulatory and legislative changes. So we'll be following that as a committee to see what goes from there. But given that public school districts fund charter schools, both brick and mortar and cyber education, we are very interested, obviously, in anything that impacts the charter school world. So with that, I would like to move into public comment, and if there's anybody out there who would like to provide some public comment, now's the time. Good afternoon, Dr. Winters.
Good afternoon. I hope you've all had a wonderful summer. I know I wanted to also echo the sentiments expressed thanking Michael and the communication department for all of their efforts. And I think as someone who's concerned about public participation, I think the fact that the public can email questions to be asked at the meetings and also phone in questions makes a difference, because a lot of people I know do not always attend the meetings but do watch them. And I think that opportunity is much appreciated. You might not hear about it all the time, but it's always nice to be there. The other thing I would like to mention is, I believe several years ago we had someone from the IU present an informational session about the AITC program. I don't think she did a very comprehensive job of that, and I think it might be wise, considering its impact and growing influence in our state and also on its impact in Radnor, because I do know that some of that money does make its way through, for example, the Radnor Education Foundation, I believe, can use some of that monies. But I think we really need to look at that in a comprehensive way. And I would always, we always talk about things we can improve as well, and I think I've mentioned before, and I will continue to ask, because I know we do have many of our public citizens who do have impairments in hearing. And if there's any way we can work to provide some kind of effort so that those who are hearing impaired might be able to, in fact, get a sense of what's happening at the meetings, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Winters. Mr. Petiti?
I just want to quickly respond. YouTube has gotten much better. It's actually pretty incredible. For whatever reason, I was testing a closed captioning ability on YouTube, and it was syncing up exactly with the board meeting from a couple months ago, to the point of it was actually getting names correct. And so it's advanced pretty reliably. Initially, it was kind of sketchy, but I would try that because it does work pretty well.
Could I respond to that? And would you also put that perhaps where people go to access, how they might make that available to them if they want to have the closed caption piece? Because we would certainly want to make sure that when they go to that site to pick it up, they also have that information that would help them.
Yep.
I'm not sure everyone's aware of even how that works, because many of them are not as familiar with technology as we would like them to be.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Is there anybody else who would like to lend public comment to our meeting tonight? No? Okay, well then, the meeting is adjourned, and we'll see you all in September.